these aesthetic structures are ways of explaining, or if you like, making apparent our experience of these social experiments, and trying to return them to a notion of, well, of originary harmony, if you like. And so the fact that you have to have kings in the days of Oedipus is transformed into a tragedy that allows you to understand the necessity of kingship and its, in a sense, to recreate a kind of equality, because the king at the end who is high, then he's low. So, I mean, it's the simplest, you can call it sacrificial, but it's also, you know, it's why I quoted Anaximander, you know, it's paying the price for being in the order of time. But the question of, so in that aesthetic typology, which Andrew was kind enough to kind of quote from, I do have a category of modernity. And in fact, I don't want to go into it, but if you read my thing on the Bronx Romantic, you know that I always felt a certain repulsion toward modernism, because I think Tom may have mentioned that, you know, because modernists are sort of snobs, people who've already assimilated Western culture, and they're kind of making fun of it. But in a more positive vein, I mean, that's the sort of superficial aspect of modernism. Modernism is that last sort of desperate attempt to, by jettisoning things like figurality and to a certain extent narrative coherence, the modernist attempts to find within himself, in a kind of super romantic way, because the romantics already tried to find the world in themselves, but we find that naive, because what they were really finding was, well, I don't want to just call it a romantic lie, but I mean, it's certainly, the idea is that they're really finding what was there already, and they think they can rediscover the world simply by looking in themselves, but what you find looking in yourself is all the ideas you've gotten from everyone else. And so you have the, you know, the idea of the young romantic who nobody understands him, you know, and he's alone in the world. He's like Rousseau's, you know, solitary, promeneur solitaire. But modernism realizes the futility of that, and I had a period also of postmodernism, of post-romanticism, which I think is crucial. And the notion of 1848, which, you know, Bob alluded to in talking about Nerval, this is a crucial European experience. It's what made France the avant-garde country, whereas before it was England, because it was that experience of the Romantic Revolution of 1848 and its failure, which led to Marx, which led to French post-Romantic disillusion, Flaubert, Baudelaire, and so on. This is a way of transcending the romantic. But modernism comes from, takes a much more, well, in a way it goes back to romanticism, but it rejects the kind of negativity which you find in post-romanticism, which is essentially an aestheticism. It's, you know, saying that, as in Flaubert's Éducation sentimentale, the only thing that's good is the desire that was never fulfilled. You know, c'est là ce que nous avons eu de meilleur. I don't want to go into all that, but in other words, it's basically finding refuge in art. And Bourdieu has very interesting observations about how how the bourgeois art market would buy up these reflections that essentially told them that their lives were futile, but that Flaubert, you know, in a sense was, just as I always say, that the romantic who turns his back on the market is simply preparing himself for the market because he's creating a difference that he can later sell, like Théophile Gautier's Red Vest, you know, which in the same way, Flaubert's idea of the artist is still something that you can sell back to the bourgeoisie, because my life is futile, but then I read Flaubert's novel, I realize that I'm really superior to that life. Well, the modernist, you know, has seen too much to deal with that. It's interesting, the coincidence between high modernism and World War I. You see, you know, World War I was not perhaps as bad as Auschwitz, but when you think about it, it was one of the most, certainly the most horrible experience in the history of Western culture. If you just think of all those millions of people, I mean, today you have, you know, a few thousand soldiers get killed, and it's considered a catastrophe, which it is. But I mean, here you have millions of people, whole cities are wiped out for nothing, really. It's an amazing example of how we tend to banalize these events. But in any case, so modernism really is largely a reaction to that, going back into the self and finding these primitive desires that are not mediated by society, you know, the attempt to find, say, the surrealists reading Freud and trying to find some kind of a basis for a human community that's beyond any kind of priorly established community. It's so that it's not like looking into each other's eyes and seeing that we're all brothers. It's looking into myself and telling you to all go to hell and finding in myself this authentic human thing, which then I can communicate to you in the superior manner of the modernist and say, you know, I'm the one who knows how to save the world because I'm an artist. And so it's that kind of paroxysm that leads to, you know, the great achievements of modernism, like, say, James Joyce and, of course, Proust, but, and non-figural art, Picasso, and whatever. But the postmodern era, of course, is, well, after you have World War I, you think, oh, well, now we'll have peace forever. That was the last war, right? And then, of course, you know, a few years later, you have Auschwitz and so on. So World War II was genuinely the last true war, because if we have another one like that, there won't be anything left. So you reach the stage where Western civilization just seems to have no legitimacy, and the only way you can deal with it is by removing any authority and just sort of looking at relations and seeing if they fit the Nazi Jew paradigm, and then if they do, well, then we have to change it. And that's where you get this kind of promotion of resentment as the only true epistemology, or the only way we can know about ethics is through resentment. If you see someone resentful, then you can sort of assume that, you know, maybe somebody did something to him, as opposed to, say, the way Dostoevsky would look at resentment, you know, as essentially a sign of the damned, of the man from underground. You know. And this leads to this sort of art problems that, you know, I mean, so modernism is still, in other words, a search for totality. And if I understood that gentleman was talking about art the other day, you know, that these people are still talking about sort of modernist totalities versus postmodernism as a way of denying the possibility of totality. And then, like, but you know, there's a lot to be said about this, but I think that the postmodern era is still best defined in these ethical terms by the relationship to the World War II, to the Holocaust, and to the necessity to deny any kind of inequality, to delegitimize any kind of unequal social structure, and therefore to remove the authority from the center. And so you have all this kind of, well, deconstruction. But,
and the collapse of the aesthetic.
Well, I don't want to say that the aesthetic is, you know, I'm not that pessimistic, because the aesthetic is always a way of re-establishing some kind of totality. But the problem of the fine arts, I think, is also the question of the figural art seems to have become a question of the marketplace and kind of an empty mimesis that lacks any criterion for centrality. But I can't imagine that this can be a permanent problem. And I do see some art as quite authentic. I think the cinema is still producing masterpieces, and perhaps with that use of figurality, the kind of fetishistic figurality of painting has sort of lost its ability to capture the real experience, and therefore it becomes kind of fetish. Well, you know, a movie is something you see, but a painting is something you buy. So I'm going to pay $1 million for this, you know, piece of.